Our three closed sessions today will explore the changing dynamics of the oil market, the unprecedented economic reforms underway in the GCC countries, and the geopolitical challenges in the low oil price environment. We're fortunate today to have as our keynote luncheon speaker Her Excellency Ms. Sarah Akbar, CEO and board member director of the board of Kuwait Energy. Sarah has had extensive experience in managing tumultuous and significant changes in the international oil business. Her Excellency will provide us with the Gulf perspective on the impact of lower oil revenues and the new energy landscape emerging in the region. We're also delighted to have with us this morning His Excellency Chekib Khelil, Algeria's former foreign energy minister and former president of OPEC. His Excellency is ideally suited to discuss the current role of OPEC amid the paradigm shift in the international oil markets. I would like to take a moment to thank Bill Thomas, CEO and chairman of EOG Resources, for his support by sponsoring this conference. He has allowed us to bring together this distinguished group of panelists and discussants, and we appreciate the support from EOG. Thank you, Bill. Last but not least, I would like to thank Diane Monroe for her hard work in helping us put together this event. She's been working on it for several months, as well as Raymond Karam, our Director of Programs and Communications, and his great team for the very long hours and excellent organizational skills in planning every aspect of today's event. Thank you all. Great team. Your Excellency.
Well, good morning. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for inviting me to this Gulf Institute conference. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be discussing, the challenges for OPEC, in the new energy world. After OPEC's decision not to cut production in November 2014, the oil market entered a crisis far greater than those of 1986 and 2008. OPEC's decision was taken apparently based on lessons learned from the 1986 crisis. In the present crisis, the prices dropped 75% from the highest level compared to only about 70% in 86 and 2008. And today's prices are recovering from their lowest level a year later, or even much later than that, than in those two previous crises. And market rebalancing is not expected before the end of 2017. Today's crisis is particularly similar to the crisis of 86, when OPEC failed to stabilize prices through its own production cuts in the face of the non-OPEC swing production coming from Alaska and the North Sea. And OPEC had to resort to a price target strategy of $18 at that time to regain its market share. And this strategy lasted more than 20 years, despite the 1990 Iraq War, the 1997 Asian financial crisis, the 2001 World Trade Center attack, the 2002 attempted coup in Venezuela, and the 2003 oil shutdown in Nigeria. And it was only the dramatic rise of China in the early 2000s as an insatiable oil importer that broke OPEC's equation. And he rolled China's spot as an escapable part of the global oil equation. China's rise also coincided with a sudden upsurge in geopolitical uncertainties in the Middle East, following the second modern war in Iraq. And this combination constituted a paradigm shift in market determinants. During the last 10 years, in addition to oil supply, demand, and economic factors, operators started factoring in geopolitical uncertainties and the risks associated with them. Oil prices reached new highs, integrating exceptional price risk premiums for potential disruptions of oil production and trade flows. High oil prices, in turn, benefited the development of unconventional resources of shale gas and then shale oil in the United States. This phenomenon meant that oil prices stabilized around the relatively high level that was required to reward big spending by companies developing shale oil reserves in the United States. Until recently, despite armed conflicts between certain members of OPEC, OPEC did make major decisions on economic terms, and politics from its members interfered little in its operations. A prime example is the 2008 financial crisis that led to a downturn in economic growth and oil demand. In December of that year, I presided over the OPEC conference in Oran, Algeria, which decided to cut more than 4 million barrels per day, and we quickly reestablished the balance in the market within a year. The OPEC of today is in disarray and not primed to take decisive action motivated primarily by economic indicators. King Mohammed bin Salman apparently scuttled the oil freeze deal in Doha, and it's not clear whether he would support such a move in Algiers. And while Naimi was the only voice during his time as minister, there are several voices speaking on oil policy in Saudi Arabia today. Russian leader Vladimir Putin is for an oil production freeze in Algiers. Even Harold Ham, an advisor to candidate Trump, said Russia and OPEC should reduce production and raise prices. Politics has thus reinvaded the realm of OPEC in a way not seen since the 70s and 80s, and renders future agreements between members even more difficult to achieve. In terms of oil supply, one might note that major projects with long lead times worth hundreds of billions of dollars have been dropped or postponed by major oil companies in 2015. The disappearance of these projects could have serious repercussions on the oil market during the 2020s and could herald a tightening of the oil market at that time for lack of sufficient supply. It is clear that shale oil technology can unleash new production and on short notice, provided the price is right. The speed would depend on terms of financing for new projects. And the Fed rate policy in the future would make those terms more expensive than previously obtained by the small oil companies. As of August 1st, 2016, the drop in market prices led to 90 companies filing for bankruptcy in the US. with an aggregate debt of 66.5 with an aggregate debt of $66.5 billion. And 175 publicly traded companies were at risk of going bankrupt, according to Deloitte and Touch. US shale oil has been beaten back for the moment, by the OPEC's market share defense strategy, and the US is today importing more oil than it produces. It is clear now that higher prices than $40 to $50 a barrel, combined with continued improvement in cost efficiency by US shale oil, is a threat to OPEC's market share defense strategy. Supply from Russia and OPEC members such as Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Iran appear to have reached a maximum, except possibly for small adjustment from Iraq and Iran. It is worth noting that Russia and China's production are expected to decline in 2017 and beyond. What is even more important is that each has achieved its highest share in the market and may not feel threatened in the future as global oil demand increases. Oil demand, as you know, is expected to increase by between 1 and 1.5 million barrels per day each year, in relation, of course, to world economic growth and driven mainly by demand from China, India, and the developing countries. With an expected increase in oil demand, it is also clear that beyond 2017, and even including the return of Libya to the oil market by then, the oil market would have an increased space for more supply from the US shale oil as a swing producer. The rate of increase of shale oil production and the resulting balance in the market, whether loose or tight, would probably dictate what price level we would achieve beyond 2017. While US shale oil is now taken more seriously by OPEC, the organization has thus far not devised an appropriate strategy to deal with it. The main reason for that is that OPEC's members cannot come up with a consensus, as they are now heavily influenced by political issues in Syria and Yemen, and also perceived threats coming from one another. Today, members do not appear to share that their own interest lies with that of the organization, mainly because Saudi Arabia distrusts that other members, other than the Gulf countries, would comply fully with the organization decision. The compliance issue has always been a thorn in the side of the organization in the past. OPEC countries continue to rely on oil revenues to finance their ambitious economic programs and social needs. These revenue needs have increased with population growth, and of course with the demand for better living standards from the population. And the drop in oil prices led OPEC and some non-OPEC producers to sustain large budget deficits, cuts in spending, currency devaluation, and inflation. Whether they can sustain them without social and political upheavals remains an open question. But upheavals in any member country that could reduce its production could spell disaster for the oil market and the world economy, because Saudi Arabia has abandoned its role as the last resort producer, preferring instead capturing the largest market share possible for its oil. And the pain felt by each OPEC member country is different, depending on the level of diversification of its economy, the level of debt, the magnitude of the currency reserves cushion, and the level of budget commitments for direct and indirect subsidies. Without question, the diversification of their economies should be the highest priority for all OPEC members. And Saudi Arabia has taken the first small steps in this direction. But the structural reforms needed for this kind of change will be difficult, both socially and politically. And timing them properly is necessary to prevent societal upheavals. Because OPEC controls 80% of the world oil reserves, most market analysts expect it to play an important role in securing needed additional oil supplies, stabilizing the market, and safeguarding world economic growth in the future. It is expected that 70 to 80% of the global energy mix in 2035 will be constituted by fossil fuels, with an oil share as significant as it is today. OPEC member states like Iraq and Venezuela can be expected to play a key role because both have huge conventional and unconventional oil reserves. In summary, today's oil prices can only be a floor price for the future and beyond 2017, as increased demand will likely make room for increased shale oil production. OPEC members and Russia capacity would reach its limit except for small adjustments in supply. The likely scenario in Algiers would be for a Russia and Saudi Arabia production freeze, which would have psychological but positive impact on prices. And of course, the reverse is true, while still awaiting the rebalancing of the oil market in late 2017. In the immediate future, OPEC will probably continue with its market share defense strategy. And future strategies may probably include a cut in production and or a fixing of a price target while keeping an eye on the evolution of the US shale oil production. The global oil market will continue to strengthen slowly, but it will remain characterized by volatility due to the continued uncertainties in the macroeconomy, supply and demand, and geopolitics. And thank you for your attention.